Again, another massacre. Uvalde, Texas. An elementary school. Beautiful, innocent, second, third, fourth graders. And how many scores of little children who witness what happened, see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake. They'll live with it the rest of their lives. There's a lot we don't know yet. There's a lot we do know. Parents who will never see their child again, never have them jump in bed and cuddle with them. Parents who will never be the same. To lose a child is like having a piece of your soul ripped away. There's a hollowness in your chest. You feel like you're being sucked into it and never going to be able to get out. Suffocating. And it's never quite the same. It's a feeling shared by the siblings and the grandparents and the family members and the community that's left behind. Scripture says, Jill and I have talked about this in different contexts, in other contexts. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. So many crushed spirits. So tonight, I ask the nation to pray for them. Give the parents and siblings the strength in the darkness they feel.
Violence, guns. I'm a cop. I'm a deputy here in Uvalde County. This is enough. This is enough. No one else needs to go through this. We never needed to go through this, but we are.
Felix Rubio lost his daughter Lexi in yesterday's shooting in Texas. 18 other fourth graders, 2 teachers also died in this horrific attack. All sharing a pain and a bond now that should never exist. In the past 24 hours, we are learning so much more about the victims and their stories. Ron Jones joining us with more on that tonight.
Yeah, that's right, guys. So remember these children and the teachers as well. That's what the parents are asking us tonight. These are just some of the victims of this tragic massacre, almost all of them around the age of 10 years old. And police say the shooter cornered them in a classroom before opening fire. Amir Joe Garza was shot while trying to call 911. Irma Garcia, another teacher, died while she was trying to shield her students. 17 others were hurt, and they're still recovering tonight. Authorities say there was little warning the violence was coming to that school from the gunman who they identified as a former high school student, Salvador Ramos. They say that he privately messaged a woman he met online 30 minutes before the shooting saying that he was going to shoot his grandmother. He followed up with another message saying that he did, and the final message 15 minutes before the massacre said that he was going to shoot up an elementary school. Well, police say an off-duty patrol officer, a patrol agent, and 2 other police officers managed to find and kill the shooter even after he barricaded himself. And today at a news conference, Texas Governor Greg Abbott praised their swift action.
They showed amazing courage by running toward gunfire for the singular purpose of trying to save lives.
Now, many of you have already reached out to 11 Alive asking, how can we help the victims and their families as well? Well, there's so many ways you can do that, and you can find a link on our website at 11alive.com.
Fire with an AR-15, also dead, killed by law enforcement. Governor Abbott has begun to speak. Let's listen in.
Has to have evil in his heart, but it is far more evil for someone to gun down little kids. It is intolerable and it is unacceptable for us to have in the state anybody who would kill little kids in our schools. Children are a blessing. God teaches us that. They're filled with laughter, innocence, and joy. Their love is a gift that parents get to unwrap every single day. Parents in Uvalde had that gift taken away from them, stolen by a demented person. Days before yesterday, when these children were at school, some were receiving awards for perfect attendance. These kids will never attend school again. To say the least, Uvalde has been shaken to its core. Families are broken apart. Hearts are forever shattered. All Texans are grieving with the people of Uvalde, and people are rightfully angry about what has happened. Events like this, they tear at the fabric of a community. Our job is to ensure that the community is not going to be ripped apart. All Texans must come together and support the families who have been affected by this horrific tragedy. What they need now more than ever is our love. What they need is uplifting from all of our fellow Texans and all of our fellow Americans. And let me emphasize something that I know you all know. But the reality is, as horrible as what happened, it could have been worse. The reason it was not worse is because law enforcement officials did what they do. They showed amazing courage by running toward gunfire for the singular purpose of trying to save lives. And it is a fact that because of their quick response, getting on the scene, being able to respond to the gunman and eliminate the gunman, they were able to save lives. Unfortunately, not enough. But I want to make sure that everybody knows, all of the law enforcement agencies and groups that are involved and were involved in this process. The Texas Rangers are leading the investigation, and they are supported by the Texas Department of Public Safety Highway Patrol, the Texas Department of Public Safety Criminal Investigative Division, DPS Aircraft, DPS Intelligence Counter-Terrorism Division, DPS Crime and Victim Support. They're also supported by the Texas Division of Emergency Management, the FBI, as well as multiple federal partners, including the DEA, ATF, HSI, and Border Patrol. And then, of course, the valiant local officials, the Uvalde Sheriff's Department, Uvalde Police Department, Uvalde Independent School District Police, Uvalde County Constables, Uvalde Mayor, the County Judge, Uvalde District Attorney's Office, local Public Works and surrounding police department, and the San Antonio Police and Fire Department also. Let me walk you through some of the facts of what has happened. There's been a lot of things that have been said. Some are correct, some are incorrect. Let me tell you the best information that we have at this time, understanding, very importantly, that this is an ongoing investigation, and ongoing investigations often reveal new information as those investigations progress. The first thing that happened was that the gunman shot his grandmother in the face She then contacted police. The gunman fled, and as he was fleeing, he had an accident just outside of the elementary school, and he ran into the school. Officers with the Consolidated Independent School District, they approached the gunman and engaged with the gunman at that time. The gunman then entered a back door and went down 2 short hallways and then into a classroom on the left-hand side. The gunman entered into that classroom, and the classroom was connected internally to another classroom. Border Patrol, Consolidated ISD officers, police, sheriffs, and DPS officers converged on that classroom, and a Border Patrol officer killed the gunman. As I said, Texas Rangers are leading the investigation, joined by federal, state, and local law enforcement officials. At this time, we know that 19 children have lost their lives. 2 faculty members lost their lives. In addition to that, there are 17 people who are injured, but their injuries are not life-threatening. All family members of all of these students and faculty members have been contacted and informed about the circumstances. Officials are working with parents to ensure that their parents are going to be able to see their children. Parents should contact victim services at the county fairplex. We know that there are parents still striving to make a connection. All parents are welcome and urged to contact victim services at the county fairplex. The gunman was 18 years old and reportedly a high school dropout. Reportedly, there has been no criminal history identified yet. He may have had a juvenile record, but that is yet to be determined. There was no known mental health history of the gunman. He used one weapon, which was an AR-15, using 223 rounds. There was no meaningful forewarning of this crime other than what I'm about to tell you. As of this time, the only information that was known in advance was posted by the gunman on Facebook approximately 30 minutes before reaching the school. The first post was to the point of, he said, "I'm going to shoot my grandmother." The second post was, "I shot my grandmother." The third post, maybe less than 15 minutes before arriving at the school, was, "I'm going to shoot an elementary school." I mentioned that during the shootout that took place at the school, in addition to the students and the faculty, there were 3 officers who were injured who were all remain in good condition. 1 deputy sheriff lost a daughter in that school. Before coming out here, we had a long discussion with law enforcement at all levels. We had a discussion with community leaders, elected officials. And I asked the sheriff and others an open-ended question and got the same answer from the sheriff as well as from the mayor of Uvalde. The question was, what is the problem here? And they were straightforward and emphatic. They said, we have a mental We have a problem with mental health illness in this community. And then they elaborated on the magnitude of the mental health challenges that they're facing in the community and the need for more mental health support in this region. I want to make sure everybody understands the mental health services that are available at this time, with me making one clarifying point in advance that I'm going to redouble down in the aftermath. Whenever anything as shocking and extraordinary and disturbing as this event occurs, there is an urgent need for everybody affected to access mental health. I cannot be more emphatic than saying with great urgency, everybody in this community, I mean everybody, the victims, the families, family members, friends, the law enforcement involved, but the entire community is in utter shock about this. Some physical wounds that were sustained by the officers, they're going to heal in the coming days. The mental and emotional wounds are far harder to see and last far longer. The state of Texas, working with federal and local officials and agencies, we're going to be here for a long, long time. And one key point that we will focus on is making sure that everybody in this community has the access they need for as long as they need it to address with the mental and emotional health care needs that they have. I want to list various agencies and make sure these are made available to the public. The mental health services currently available are from victim services from across the area, from federal, state, and local levels, including the Family Resource Center at the Uvalde County Fairplex. Schools have crisis teams at the Uvalde Civic Center. They provide wraparound services for families who are affected. The Texas Child Mental Health Consortium, created by the state legislature in 2019, is available to assist. The Bluebonnet Children's Advocacy Center is available to provide services for children. The Texas Health and Human Services Commission is on site and will be available for ongoing provision of services. The Texas Education Agency is providing supplemental counseling services. The Texas Department of Public Safety Counseling is providing counseling services for law enforcement. And the FBI is also bringing in mental health services for law enforcement. It cannot be overemphasized the importance of law enforcement officers, all of them, seeking out and obtaining this mental health counseling. The District Attorney's Office for Victim Services has a phone number available for all victims, and candidly, the entire community, in a way, is a victim here. And I was provided their number to give out to you publicly. This is the number for the District Attorney's Office for Victim Services. The number is 830-278-2916. And at this time, I will pass the mic to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Sit down.
You're out of line and an embarrassment.
Sit down and don't play this stuff.
The next shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a bitch that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue. It's on assholes like you. Why don't you get out of here?
You have been watching a news conference a couple miles from where I'm standing featuring Texas Governor Greg Abbott, confronted at the end of his remarks by Beto O'Rourke. We could not make out what Mr. O'Rourke was saying, but some profanity from the stage from the deputy governor, the lieutenant governor of Texas. We presume the issue was over a key question from the press conference. Governor Abbott said in private to law enforcement and recounted the story to the public. What is the problem? And his answer,
You are crying as we speak.
his answer was mental health, not guns.
Hearts are broken.
Let's listen back in. Governor Greg Abbott is addressing the crowd once again.
Do anything to heal those broken hearts. We all, every Texan, every American has a responsibility where we need to focus not on ourselves and our agendas. We need to focus on the healing and hope that we can provide to those who have suffered unconscionable damage to their lives and loss of life. We need all Texans to, in this one moment in time, put aside personal agendas, think of somebody other than ourselves, think about the people who were hurt, and help those who have been hurt. And this time, Lieutenant Governor will speak.
I was just about to say that there will be plenty of time.
We're going to cut back in here as the Lieutenant Governor begins his remarks. His earlier remarks directly to Beto O'Rourke, former congressman now running for governor from the great state of Texas. He said, "You sick son of a word I can't repeat, sit down, you are out of line." This a difference of opinion, you might say, in the most dramatic form over what exactly is to blame for the massacre in the building behind me and what exactly this community needs now. Healing for those who are suffering or a change to policy to help the next victims, the victims to come. Let's go now to Janet Chamberlain, who was at the press conference. Janet, you were in the room. My goodness, could you make out what was being said by Beto O'Rourke?
Well, I did see what happened just before the press conference started. I was in the third row on the aisle, rather, and there were two people across the aisle from me, and a moment before the press conference started, they got up from their seats when Beto walked in. So they were seat holders for him, and then he sat down. So his presence wasn't really noticed in the 15 or 20 minutes that people were gathering inside because he was not in the room. So this seems something very clearly staged by Beto O'Rourke and his campaign wanting to confront the governor at this moment. Also want to talk just a little bit about some of the new information that we have learned, and it is considerable. We did learn that we knew that the suspect had shot his grandmother, but the governor told us that that grandmother was shot in the face. Also, we learned that a member of law enforcement has lost a child in this, and a few more details just about what happened. There were two classrooms that were connected. The shooter was able to access both, and I just have to tell you that it looks like maybe Beto O'Rourke is being removed, or somebody right now, because there's a lot of commotion here behind me. But certainly a news-making press conference that is still going on, Tony.
Yeah, Janet, you know, to hear you talk about the seat holders for Beto O'Rourke, it definitely indicates that Beto had a plan to get in there and make some sort of a scene. We still don't know exactly what he said. So it was staged, as you point out. Of course, a press conference, which is what was going on the stage, is also staged. So some political do-si-do here in the state of Texas. Two other items I think that were interesting, that were new coming out of that press conference. You know what, Janet? We've got Beto with a scrum of reporters and some audio. Let's listen in and hear what he has to say.
Todo lo que es posible para prevenir
estas masacres que tenemos en cada comunidad, Sutherland Springs, Santa Fe High School en el condado acerca de Harris, en El Paso también. Tenemos el poder, pero necesitamos hacer algo en este momento. Si no hacemos algo, vamos a continuar con las masacres como la masacre que tuvimos aquí en Uvalde en esta semana aquí.
His exact purpose was there, but we presume it had something to do with gun control, a policy platform that is important to him and to many others in his party, many other Americans for that matter. Janet, to pick up where we left off, two other interesting things from the press conference. The gunman using a back door, I didn't know that. And then making his way to an empty classroom with some sort of a sliding door or access to then a full classroom. That's the tragic route there. And then I was not aware of the Facebook postings. Apparently 30 minutes before he's in the school, there's a posting, I'm going to shoot my grandmother, I've shot my grandmother, and then a final posting along the lines of I'm going to shoot an elementary school. Did we know that was new information, was it not?
That's new information. So we knew there were some social media posts attributed to him, but nothing like this timeline that the governor just laid out that he posted. I'm going to shoot my grandmother. I've shot my grandmother. I'm going to an elementary school on Facebook, reportedly. The other social media posts were on TikTok and other forums.
Yeah, it was also interesting that there's no known criminal history, at least adult criminal history, to this fresh 18-year-old, just turned 18 this month. The governor not ruling out possibly some juvenile charges. Key to the debate that followed and the outburst between him and Beto O'Rourke, the governor said there is no known mental health diagnosis for the gunman who slaughtered so many in the building behind me. That would seem to gravely imperil the next statement, which was that mental health is the root of the problem here in Texas. I want to let our viewers know about a recent CBS News poll. It was taken after the Buffalo, New York mass shooting, the one from a weekend ago. Before the shooting here in Uvalde, it found that 54% of Americans, so a slim majority, do want laws covering the sale of guns made more strict than they are now. 30% said the laws should be kept about where they are, and 16% want them to be even less strict. It gives you a sense of where the country is. Most people want some sort of tightening of the regulations as they exist. For more on the powers that be in Washington who might be able to change those regulations, let's bring in congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. He's made his way to Capitol Hill for us. Scott, I know you've been trying to talk to members of Congress. What are they telling you? What do you know?
Tony, as this is happening, the Senate has begun the procedure to eventually debate two new gun control measures, one of which was passed by the U.S. House and would tighten background checks for some gun sales and transfers. But the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee told me a short while ago the Senate won't debate those bills or take them up on the floor until after the Memorial Day recess. And the Senate doesn't just take a 3-day weekend for Memorial Day. They don't come back here till the second week of June. So there'll be some time between now and any floor debate. Some of the centrist senators are talking about a possible negotiation over red flag laws. That's the law by which a judge can order a gun removed from somebody deemed dangerous. But there was another red line drawn today by that pivotal Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. The moderate Democrat told us he is not going to support removing the filibuster for these gun control debates. The filibuster requires a 60-vote threshold to pass gun control law, and there are simply not 60 votes in the U.S. Senate at this moment in time, and pretty much anything, much less gun control. One other note, Tony. Republicans today here at the Capitol were talking about school hardening, providing more money for more armed police or more school apparatus to protect against gun crimes. But we checked with the Department of Justice. Just last year, they handed out tens of millions of dollars to local school systems for school hardening. Tony, that's in addition to the local tax money that is regularly spent on that endeavor.
It's an interesting suggestion, Scott. You know, a lieutenant in the Texas Department of Public Safety told me earlier today that this gunman was engaged by at least 2 law enforcement officers on his way into the building, and that degree of hardening was not enough to keep him out. And then it was and then it was an elite unit that was actually able to get into the building. But one more question on the Democrats. Senator Chuck Schumer, he has been outspoken on the issue. We heard from him earlier today. What did he say?
He's been talking about having a vote to get everybody on the record, a messaging vote. Take a listen to some of his remarks on the Senate floor late this morning.
Please, 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 damn it, put yourself in the shoes of these parents for once. Maybe that thought, putting yourself in the shoes of these parents instead of in the arms of the NRA, might let you wriggle free from the vice-like grip of the NRA, might free you to act on even a simple measure. For the sake of these children, these 9-year-olds, these 10-year-olds, these 11-year-olds, these beautiful children, please, damn it, please, think if it was your child or grandchild.
I'll underscore, though, Senator Schumer is going to wait for a formal floor debate until mid-June, Tony.
Well, Scott, I mean, we had a show vote when it came to abortion. Now we're talking about a show vote when it comes to a show vote, rather, when it comes to gun control. I wonder when there's going to be some compromise and members of both parties will be able to get behind something. As you say, there's that 60-vote threshold. Scott, thank you. We've got some news here. CBS News has confirmed that 4 of the 21 victims, including an 8-year-old girl, Uzia Garcia, 9-year-old Amari Joe Garza, 10-year-old Annabelle Rodriguez, and the teacher, that was Ava Morales. Those are the 4 known victims so far. Lilia Luciano has been on this part of the story for us, and she's made her way down here to Texas and is over at Sacred Heart Church here in Uvalde. Lilia, good afternoon to you. What do you know? What are you hearing there?
Good afternoon, Tony. Well, we're trying to get more details about the lives these young children lived, the lives of at least this one teacher and who the other victims were. I've been talking to people in this community who everybody seemed to be almost directly or pretty directly and indirectly impacted by this. Everywhere I've gone to stores and coffee shops. I've been here at the church. I talked to Father Matthew de Leon, who held a prayer yesterday, and he's been offering services, him and other staff in his church, for the families. He's been talking to little children. He says those little children who survived this horrible shooting, all they were concerned about was their friends. There's going to be a vigil with the Archbishop and the Bishop of Piedras Negras across the border. We'll keep you informed on everything around these victims in this Latino community.
Lilia, thank you very much. Tomorrow was supposed to be the last day of school here, the start of summer vacation, but in the wake of this massacre, the superintendent said last night, quote, the school year is done. Governor Greg Abbott said children are a blessing. That's certainly true. Guns are a right, though, and one seems to be threatening the other at the moment. Our coverage will continue on CBS News streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Tony DeCopel in Uvalde, Texas.
Well, you have been watching a CBS News special report. We now want to take you back to the press conference that's being led by Governor Greg Abbott and a delegation of Texas politicians who, again, are mourning and grieving in the loss of the students and teachers killed in yesterday's mass shooting. Here is the press conference in Uvalde, still going on.
Out of the classroom, when it was safe, when they were guided, and the trust our kids had in their teachers, that says volumes for our staff here in Uvalde. They are heroes. They did heroic things yesterday, and they are always very humble, but they are truly humble heroes. Yesterday, we lost 2 teachers. These 2 teachers, I would say, are the cornerstone of that campus to some great degree. There are 2 beautiful souls. They have taught on that campus for many years. They have kids in our district, and they poured their heart and soul into what they did in educating our kids in Uvalde. 19 students, 19 precious students who came to school yesterday to enjoy the day, to enjoy the award assembly. And as I look at their pictures, you can just tell by their angelic smile that they were loved, that they loved coming to school, and they were just precious individuals. This is a difficult time for everybody. We are hurting. We have been cut deep here in our community. We will move forward. It's going to take some time moving forward. While our faith has been shaken, we ask you to continue to pray for these families, these kids in our community, and our teachers. I am a product of Uvalde. I'm born and raised here. I've worked for this district for 30 years. And never thought I would be sitting in front of you doing this today. But please pray for our teachers, pray for our community, and we will move forward. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. We'll take a few questions.
Governor, you've talked a lot about mental health. You've not talked about guns. Do you think an 18-year-old who's been improvised weaponry than you want, would you commit to making any changes as far as gun laws?
So the ability of an 18-year-old to buy a long gun has been in place in the state of Texas for more than 60 years. And think about during the time over the course of that 60 years, we have not had episodes like this. And why is it that for the majority of those 60 years, we did not have school shootings? And why is it that we do now? The reality is I don't know the answer to that question. However, what I do know in talking to the leaders here, as well as leaders in other locations around the state, and that is one thing that has substantially changed is the status of mental health in our communities. What I do know is this, and that is we as a state, we as a society, need to do a better job with mental health. Anybody who shoots somebody else has a mental health challenge, period. We as a government need to find a way to target that mental health challenge and do something about it. Director McCraw will have the best information on that.
We're in the process of doing the crime scene right now. The first one being the school, the second being the vehicle, and the third, the grandmother's residence. And I can tell you where it's a detailed process, so I can't answer that. But for right now, we believe that all the children were shot and killed by Ramos.
Director, in terms of the perpetrators, social media and postings that have been reported and analyzed, you don't believe that there was any sort of a warning or any information that would indicate that he was posing some sort of danger, maybe not a precise danger to this specific school, but weren't there warning signs that were available on social media, maybe to the platforms, maybe to people he was communicating with?
We did see some, and I think one was of a concern, and that concern was, relayed to allegedly, we haven't confirmed it yet, to someone in California who didn't report it. And we're in the process of working with the FBI right now to make sure she's interviewed and find out more about it. There may be other clues out there right now that we're not aware of. This is a preliminary part of the investigation, and we're going to scour everything to find anything that what could have indicated in some way, shape, or form that this individual is a threat to the community.
But nothing had come to local law enforcement as they could have acted?
None at all. In fact, this is, we're astounded at the beginning of the investigation because there's usually something out there, but right now, it is as that reported on the timeline. If we find out something else, we'll provide that information.
So I'm going to answer in part, but we also have the TEA Commissioner, Mike Morath, with us, who may be able to shed additional light. But here's the information that we know, and you pointed out SB 11. Listen, as you know, but others may not. People need to understand that in the aftermath of the Santa Fe shooting, I signed 17 laws to address school safety. and one of them dealt with threat assessment and preparation for threat assessment. And there are certain standards that schools are required to comply with to make sure that they are addressing threat assessments. I have no information as we speak at this particular time about the status of this particular elementary school or the ISD about what the status was concerning threat assessments. However, to make sure that your broader question is answered sufficiently, Mike, you want to come up? The person coming up is Mike Morath, who is the commissioner for the Texas Education Agency.
So there's significant appropriations provided to ensure that the local school systems around the state have resources for this. One of the components of Senate Bill 11 was a school safety allotment. There was additional upfront funding for that. The Texas School Safety Center and our agency work in collaboration to provide technical assistance and training to school district leaders, counseling team leaders, others, to ensure that the threat assessment protocols and these procedures, including threat response plans, the operational multi-hazard plans, are practiced on a recurring basis. So there have been essentially fairly significant efforts to bolster those managerial practices and these detective or preventative practices in schools all over the state of Texas. We will continue to do more. After any incident like this, of course, you reflect on lessons learned to ensure that we can prevent this kind of situation in schools going forward.
Yeah, if I can just add to that.
One second. I'll call on you next. 1 second.
If I can just add to that briefly, in 19, the House and Senate worked together, put $100 million into trying to give the schools all the tools that they needed to try and protect the students. The Marshals program, the Guardian program to arm teachers where schools want it. We left a lot of those programs optional up to the parents and the school boards and the school districts. And they're doing the best they can. And you're always going to have, again, no matter what you do, there's going to be someone to find another area that's vulnerable. But the legislature did act. The governor signed those bills, but we can and need to do more. And in the area of mental health, we've also been working on that as well, but need to do more. We've got to, in our smaller schools, where we can get down to one entrance. One entrance might be one of those solutions. If you had taken 3 more minutes to find an open door, police were there pretty quickly. But this school district has been doing a really good job in trying to protect their students. And those teachers died yesterday protecting their students. And this is a continued work for us.
Governor, you were at a political fundraiser in Walker County. Why did you not cancel that event? And your press office has stated that you plan on canceling all future political events going forward until further notice. Does that include the NRA convention here in Houston on Friday?
So first, with regard to yesterday, I was actually in Taylor County responding to a different disaster, a disaster of fires that had ripped through Taylor County and destroyed 20 homes. And that is when I learned about the shooting that was taking place pretty much at that time here. On the way back to Austin, I stopped and let people know that I could not stay, that I needed to go, and I wanted them to know what happened and get back to Austin so that I could continue my collaboration with Texas law enforcement to make sure that all the needs were being met here in the Uvalde area. As far as future plans are concerned, listen, I'm living moment to moment right now. My heart, my head, and my body are in Uvalde right now, and I'm here to help the people who are hurting.
Director, can you confirm from the moment that the campus officers engaged?
Well, you were just watching a press conference updating the investigation into Tuesday's mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. And that shooting killed 19 students and 2 teachers. 17 other people were injured. Texas Governor Greg Abbott spoke, saying all Texans need to come together to support the families and victims of this tragedy. Now, We still obviously very early in the investigation, authorities trying to determine a motive, and the investigation still going on. Frankly, it's hard to imagine at this point that'll do much for the devastated families of the 21 victims killed in yesterday's mass shooting. A horrific day continues today for the parents and the families of that community. Flowers being laid to rest outside the elementary school there, and a makeshift memorial as the community tries to somehow make sense of this senseless shooting. We want to take you now to Dulles, Virginia, where First Lady Jill Biden is addressing the school shooting in Texas. Let's watch.
Teachers, Eva and Irma. Let us pray that God cradles those broken families in the palm of his hand. But let us also pray to use the will and courage God gives each of us to act united with common sense to protect our children. Congresswoman Wexton and Mr. Ambassador, I've always said that food is love, but food is life too. And I've been heartbroken to hear the stories of parents searching for formula. As a mom and a nana, it's impossible to hear the stories of children suffering and not imagine your own children in the same.
Grief and anger slowly replace the shock in this small South Texas town after a gunman stole the lives of 19 students and 2 teachers inside Robb Elementary School. Residents gather to grieve and remember.
I cry a lot, and I've cried a lot today and yesterday.
Governor Greg Abbott describes the pain felt across the state.
To say the least, Uvalde has been shaken to its core. All Texans are grieving with the people of Uvalde, and people are rightfully angry.
During the governor's press conference, his Democratic opponent, Beto O'Rourke, spoke up.
This is totally predictable when you... Sir, you're out of line.
Growing frustration after this latest mass shooting.
And in this space, I just feel so powerless. Because after we try and we can't get a modicum of gun sense.
But for this small Texas community, life forever changed.
We need to have a voice. We need to speak. Something has to be done. This cannot happen again.
And the people want to be heard. Wendy Woolfolk, NBC News, Uvalde, Texas.
Back to that breaking news out of South Texas tonight, where at least 19 children and 2 adults were killed in a shooting at an elementary school. We now have the photograph of the suspected shooter, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos. CNN is now reporting a former classmate says Ramos texted him a photograph of a firearm and a bag filled with ammunition just days before this attack today. Ramos was shot and killed when officers were responding to the school today. The shooting has many people feeling like something needs to change to end gun violence. And tonight, many people are talking about a senator from Connecticut who took to the floor demanding action.
What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as existential as this. This isn't inevitable. These kids weren't unlucky.
All right, so bringing it back to home here in Metro Atlanta, Gwinnett County Schools, the largest district in the state, says that it will have increased patrols tomorrow just as an extra precaution. Atlanta Public Schools also planning to ramp up security as well. Now, we reached out to the FBI in Atlanta, which says there are no credible threats in the state of Georgia right now.
At this time, but then Texas DPS saying that that person went inside of the school that's right behind us. They say that he was clothed in some form of body armor, had a rifle of some sort, was firing indiscriminately, and then it was when law enforcement went inside of the school that 18-year-old returned fire and has left us with this horrendous situation that we have here. We know for a fact that two different individuals within law enforcement were injured today. The latest that we've heard is that they're going to be okay. The same cannot be said for many others in this community. You look around here, there are families who have been sending their loved ones to this very school behind us for several generations. This is such a small, tight-knit community here, and it has been utterly devastated by today's events. Marnie?
There are no words, Robert. The gunman firing indiscriminately into what we suspect is a room or an area full of children. I did speak with a lieutenant with the Department of Public Safety just a little while ago, and he wasn't able to tell us much because it is an active investigation. But I'm curious from witnesses who you have spoken with there on the scene. The one question I asked him is, where did the gunman enter the school? Have you been given any indication from witnesses, neighbors who came out and heard the commotion, or have you seen on scene the open door where he may have gotten in?
No, we've not heard that from any of the witnesses that are on the ground. That's still a question that lingers here. What we have heard from witnesses is the sound and the aftermath of what happened here, because, again, you mentioned this before, Marnie. This was supposed to be on the precipice of summer. This is 2 days before a lot of these children were supposed to be going off, having summer adventures, making memories with some of the other young ones that are in this community here. That's when everyone was thinking about here, that innocence that is so pure. And just like that, that innocence has been tainted by what has happened here today. That's the hard thing that so many people are reeling with, is that you talk about these young children who many people on this street that were standing on, they have some form of connection to the people that were inside of that school. That's the hardest pill to swallow here, is that it happened here, Uvalde, Texas, small town of just 16,000 people. And you look around here, aside from the scene behind us, so quiet, so peaceful, but not at this hour. Marnie?
Everybody knows someone. I did hear the press conference from police earlier, Robert. They said that school is finished for the year. The school superintendent spoke to the public, said we will not be having kids return. There is counselors available for those families. What more can you tell us about the resources being put forth for those families tonight who are either directly connected to or just live in this community?
That is an emphasis that we've had law enforcement make so far, is that they are committing a lot of resources, especially when it comes to mental health and taking care of all these people who have witnessed it directly, witnessed it secondhand or thirdhand, or just been somewhere in the neighborhood here trying to help as many of those people as possible. So that is a big concern for law enforcement. We have heard from the governor of Texas, who says that he's committing as many of his resources as possible to learning more about what happened inside of that building. We know the Texas Rangers are going to be involved in this. That is the investigative portion of Texas law enforcement. Texas DPS, of course, a large presence here. That's the other aspect as well, Marnie, is that you have so many different agencies that have been involved in this. That is why you see this flurry of misinformation that's going around between Customs and Border Protection. You have Texas DPS. You have the local law enforcement here on the ground. Now, all of a sudden, we are starting to get all that information channeled to more direct sources.
Most important thing is to get it right. All right, Robert Sherman, live in Uvalde, Texas for us tonight. Robert, thank you. We'll be checking back in. There are plenty of people who work very hard to try and prevent a tragedy like the one we saw in Texas today. Jeff Slotnick is one of those people. He is joining us live tonight. Jeff, you and I have spoken many times over the years, usually following events such as this, and it is hard to comprehend, but certainly in the last few years, mental health has risen to the surface and warning signs. And while we don't want to speculate on what may have happened prior to this shooting today, speak in generalities about what we should be looking for in people, red flags that should prompt us to do something in situations of concern.
In my experience and what I've studied in other shootings that have occurred in the United States and overseas, very frequently the shooter has communicated with somebody that they are going to engage in activity that becomes discovered later in social media posts, in chat rooms on Facebook, and so many other locations. What we need to do as a society is be aware of these and not just treat them casually. when we identify that kind of behavior, we have to be proactive in reporting that and getting that to the attention of the authorities. Not speculating, but in past incidents, I can tell you that this was not something that this individual thought about doing today. They've been thinking about it for some time. And I'm sure as facts become aware and the investigation continues, we're going to find out that there were warning signs and that this may have even been preventable.
You know, it was shocking for me to hear, and I don't know, get your reaction here, Jeff, the president throwing out some numbers of shootings on school campuses in the last decade or so. We'll have to verify this, but he said close to 3,500 shootings since Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut. This is what you do for a living, making our schools safe. Are our schools any safer than they were 10 years ago? Because a decade later, we've got another mass shooting and children killed.
Well, I think there's been a lot of private sector initiatives. There have been standards that have been created. There's best practices from Secret Service and Department of Justice. But how many school buildings are really taking physical security seriously, that are providing training beyond, active shooter, what do we do, and evacuations and things, but really identifying suspicious behavior, having adequate physical security systems at schools where you just don't walk in the front door of a building. You can't walk into any building in corporate America without being stopped first. We need to start looking at, in my opinion, we need to start looking at national requirements and regulatory requirements for school physical security. There's a lot of great information out there, but we have fire regulation for schools that's absolutely strict. It's embedded in every construction document, every remodel, in school plans. And I believe we haven't had a child die in a school fire since 1953. This is the new fire. This is something we need to deal with. We want to talk about legislation and action. It's my opinion, we need national standards on physical security in schools that need to be incorporated nationally, that are going to make real changes in locking down school buildings, but keeping them open and welcome for students at the same time. But, nobody should be able to walk right into a school building.
So what would that look like? What would the change that you'd like to see?
Well, in my experience, when I've done assessments of physical security for schools, one of the first things I see is, you walk in the front door of the building and the first thing you see is a sign that says, all visitors report to the office, and the office is 100 feet down the hall. I'd like to see, a primary entrance to the school that all children and visitors come through, staff, and that other doors to buildings are secured during entry time, and so that we control entry into the buildings, because that's where it starts. The further we can push out those concentric rings of security to the parking lot, to the street, and not have that first ring be at the office in the inside of the school, we're going to go very far in saving lives and preventing incidents like this.
There's always more to be done. Jeff, as always, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Marty. I appreciate you, and really sorry for everybody tonight. This is really heart-wrenching to see this.
Couldn't agree more. All right. As we wait for answers, the investigation is just beginning into what happened today in Uvalde outside Robb Elementary School. I want to bring in correspondent Kelly Beeson now with what we've learned over the last hour, particularly as it involves the gunman. Kelly?
Well, Marty, there's so many questions that law enforcement are now working to answer. At a press conference earlier today, officials did say they believe the suspect acted alone. Hours after the attack on Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, questions remain about the motive of the suspect in this case. 18-year-old Salvador Ramos, who allegedly killed his grandmother before heading to the school.
The FBI has consistently reported that 75% of school shooters have been bullied at school previously.
Ellen DeLaura is a former professor at Syracuse University who says some young people who act out in this way have decided to adopt a radical philosophy. For others, it's a way to deal with past trauma, violence or abuse in their home or their community.
They are people who oftentimes have tried to figure out a solution to what it is that they felt while they were in school, and they felt that no adult helped them.
It could be some time before we learn anything about motive, and it's too early to speculate.
Former FBI agent Phil Andrews says law enforcement officials are now looking to put those pieces of the puzzle together by taking photos of the crime scene, interviewing neighbors, reviewing digital evidence, surveillance videos, and social media, lifting any clue that points to motive or any potential assistance to the suspect.
Mostly everything is going to be in a journal or it's going to be in social media. But where you'll find it is where they're writing somewhere that are going to absolutely give you the story of why he did this, because it's not something that's so random. He's ruminated about this and processed it to the point where he couldn't take it, and this is where we end up.
And Thomas says by the end of the week, more evidence will likely emerge to potentially give clarity as to what the motive was in this case, Marnie. Yeah, if we'll never know. All right, Kelly Beeson, thank you. And we want to remind you we'll have continuing coverage on the massacre in Uvalde, Texas as the night goes on. We'll have reaction from folks in that community who have been impacted, and we're in constant communication with authorities on the ground. The flags at the White House tonight have been lowered to half-staff after the president spoke just moments ago saying, "I hoped when I became president I would not have to do this." Tonight he spoke to the nation as a father. We will be right back. And a reminder as well, it is primary night in a number of states. We'll have some results for you right after this. And some breaking news tonight, another major event happening, and that is the primaries, including in the state of Georgia. Decision Desk HQ has projected Governor Brian Kemp the winner of the Republican nomination for governor in Georgia. He has defeated former Senator David Perdue. This is a race that we have been watching closely, not just because of its importance in the state of Georgia, but also because who was in their corner. Brian Kemp was supported by Vice President Mike Pence. David Perdue, of course, was supported by former President Trump. I want to go now to correspondent Kelly Meyer. She is live in Georgia with the results coming in tonight. Kelly, good evening.
Good evening, Marnie. Well, we are waiting to hear from current Governor Brian Kemp here on this stage behind me as we learn and projecting that he will be the winner in this race, as so far, with some of the votes coming in, he is winning by a lot, a big lead ahead of former U.S. Senator David Perdue. And what you mentioned there, it's interesting, is that Kemp wasn't endorsed by former President Donald Trump here. He had the support of former Vice President Mike Pence, who campaigned with him just last night, stumping for him, calling him a friend, saying that he was the Republican candidate that could beat Stacey Abrams this November. So it's a hit to Trump's endorsement, but we are seeing in some other races that the Trump test is passing here in Georgia, where we are seeing with the race for U.S. Senate, Herschel Walker winning the Republican nomination in that race, and we are seeing that Senator Warnock will be heading to face him this November as well. But really fascinating results here with this race for Brian Kemp, and between him and Senator Perdue, former Senator David Perdue, that Kemp is able to take out this win here tonight, really sending a message to former President Donald Trump and showing that the voters here didn't really look at those endorsements. They tuned those endorsements out, and they focused here on re-electing Brian Kemp, or sending him to face Stacey Abrams, setting up that rematch that they had 4 years ago. He defeated her in 2018. Now they're setting up their rematch. Stacey Abrams telling us earlier today that it is going to be different than 4 years ago, and it will not be history repeating itself here. Marnie?
Yeah, Brian Kemp defeating Stacey Abrams by about 50,000 votes or so in the last election. So it's setting up to be a close race come this fall. What's been the reaction when you talk about the Trump endorsement and the importance of that key endorsement, especially for Republicans? You mentioned it's working, but I guess with the exception of this gubernatorial race.
Well,
Yeah, it's really been a mixed bag, Marnie. And even last week when we were covering the race in Pennsylvania, we saw that it worked for Doug Mastriano for the governor's race, but we're not sure if it worked for Dr. Oz in that race here. And we are seeing with the governor's race here in Georgia that Trump's endorsement didn't really make a difference. They wanted to see Brian Kemp take this nomination. They liked what he did during the pandemic, trying to keep Georgia open. There really was no mention of Trump in his election eve rally with Pence last night. They really focused on defeating who can defeat Stacey Abrams this November. That was the main focus for them. So it's just interesting to see this dynamic here. But still, we are waiting to see in the race for Secretary of State whether Raffensperger or Heiss will win in that race. That's going to be a close one. But like we said, Trump's pick for U.S. Senate, Republican who won the nomination there, Herschel Walker, he took that race here tonight. He's going to be facing Warnock this November. So it's interesting to see the test, some passing, some not, Trump's test here in Georgia, Marnie.
Right. Yeah. No, he's supporting candidates in down ballot races this year, about a dozen or so. And Georgia, not the only state we're focusing on tonight. Kelly Meyer, thank you. There are also primaries in Minnesota, Arkansas, Alabama, and Texas. And we'll have results for you throughout the night on this primary. More now on the devastating shooting at an elementary school in Texas. When we come back, we'll be talking to a reporter who has been on the scene since the beginning. We'll be right back. The shooting earlier today at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. We now know the suspect in this attack was armed with a rifle and wearing body armor when he entered the school. He went into the school and started firing shots indiscriminately. He also shot at authorities. They fired back, killing him. He also shot his grandmother before going to that school. We do not know her condition tonight. I want to bring in retired Texas Ranger Brad Oliver now. Sir, we appreciate your time. In an investigation like this, as you're trying to process this scene, walk us through what investigators have on their hands right now.
Well, they have a large crime scene that they are going to meticulously go through, take their time. And what everybody needs to realize is that every resource that the state of Texas has is being given to that school district, that city of Uvalde, all local law enforcement. The Texas Rangers that are there involved, that are there investigating now, the crime scene unit from the Texas Ranger Division, they will work all night long identifying all types of evidence, documenting evidence, collecting evidence. This is a huge undertaking, and we're not going to know anything for several days until we have time to meticulously process this thing.
Yeah, so important to get it right. And patience is a virtue, but it's difficult not to know who was killed and who has been injured, and many families are still waiting for that answer. In a situation such as this, how do they coordinate law enforcement in communicating with the families, the delicate process of trying to process that scene and get the answers that so many desire?
Well, they will, there's going to be a unified command. There'll be a command post. There's going to be one agency that's going to be in charge. They're going to be directing all the ins and outs, directing all the investigators how this is going to go. They want to make sure that they get all the information before they start telling this and providing this to the public, because we don't want to say anything wrong, right? And I know it's hard that we don't know things right now, but people are going to have a little bit of patience. I know it's hard. I couldn't even imagine what's going through all the parents there now and the people in Uvalde, but it's just going to take time. The Texas Rangers are the absolute best at doing this. Unfortunately, this is not the first time that the Rangers have had to work a mass shooting like this. So you can be guaranteed that they're absolutely doing the utmost job to get all the facts.
So you've got a group of investigators, a team of law enforcement on the scene at that school, and then I would imagine you have another team digging into the past of the gunman, trying to learn more about what we know about him and how he got there today.
Absolutely. They will have a timeline down, and eventually there is going to be a massive report that will be completed. I don't know when that'll be. It'll be a very long time. Don't know, since you're dealing with juveniles, the law is very clear that, releasing that stuff through the public information request is not allowed. So that's clear in Texas. But there will be a huge investigation, and there's there's no telling how many police officers right now, law enforcement agencies and officers are there on the scene right now working together to piece all this puzzle together. And like I said, they will have different teams doing different things. They'll have the crime scene team working inside the school where the grandmother was murdered. There's going to be a team there. I was looking at your footage earlier where the gunman's vehicle was. That's a crime scene. So there is multiple crime scenes going on right now that are being processed. And like I said, it's going to take, they may keep this scene for several days before they release it.
Nothing prepares you, whether you're just a civilian or a member of law enforcement, for what has happened today. I know you all train for it, but to actually be there on a scene like this, I think there can't be anything to compare.
There is nothing. It's horrific, and it makes it even worse when they're young children. You know, you can kind of compartmentalize when it's adults. I have unfortunately been involved in investigating mass shootings, and you just have to compartmentalize that. But when it is children, it is devastating. What people need to realize that those law enforcement officers that are at that scene right now, they're human, and it's going to affect them. And I do know that Texas DPS will be providing all types of services for these officers after today when they're working through this, so they can talk to get any type of counseling they need. And I've seen that many times that Texas DPS will absolutely provide that, not just for our own people, right? I've been retired for a little bit, but even all the other agencies that are there, they will make sure that these officers are going to have the ability to get some type of counseling.
It's an important, critical job. Brad Oliver, we appreciate you giving us some time tonight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
I want to bring in Allie Bradley now. She is a journalist who has been on the scene in Uvalde, Texas, really since the beginning. She was nearby and was able to rush there as things were happening and law enforcement was arriving. Allie, thank you for your time tonight. I know you spoke with people who were close and watched the situation unfold. What did they tell you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on here, first of all. But they were telling me that they were watching this scene unfold. They were living right next to this situation where it happened, and they saw this shooter drive by, and they said he was speeding by, and they didn't really think much of it because they see a lot of pursuits out here. They see a lot of human and drug smuggling pursuits out here. So they didn't really think anything of it, and the truck crashed nearby the school. And so they watched people from the funeral home run out and kind of run to the aid and see if everybody was okay. That's when they said the shots really started firing. They watched that shooter run towards the school and jump over the fence and actually gain access to that school. Now, they said it didn't look like he necessarily had an agenda to get to that school, more like he crashed nearby and went over there and had the gun with him. And of course, the grandmother's house is just about a mile away from where this school is. And so they were telling me that one of them actually went to school with him. And he was saying, 2 years ago when he was in school with him, that they were in PE together. He said that he never suspected anything. He said that the shooter didn't display any kind of behavior that they would have anticipated that he would have ended up shooting and killing 18 kids. It is nothing that he ever thought would have happened. He used the word sketchy. There was nothing sketchy about him. Now, I just left from one of my sources' homes, actually, who had a child in that school. Thankfully, those children are home with them safely. The third-grade boy was able to tell me what he witnessed. He saw the shooter. He saw him fire shots, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, I know this man is not worried about hurting people." And I asked him if he has to go back to school, and he says he did not want to go back to school. He said he didn't know if he was going to survive, and he said they were at recess when this happened. I asked if he knew what they were supposed to do, and he said no. They just basically all ran back inside, and he said that, he heard all the shots being fired. And so right now he's saying he's traumatized, and he doesn't want to go back to school, and he's a third grader. So this is what we're dealing with right now in this really small community. And I mean, really, this response, how quick it was, it's because of the crisis that's going on right here that I've been down here covering, which is why I was so close. It's because we've been covering the influx of illegal immigration here along the southern border. That is why so many agents were deployed out here. That is why so many people were here to respond to this crisis, and so quickly at that.
Allie, you said something there that struck me because I hadn't heard it yet, that the students were at recess. So To your knowledge, based on what authorities have told you and witnesses, did this shooting happen outside or inside of the school building?
You know, I don't have that confirmed, so I'm not really comfortable going with that, but I can tell you the first dispatch call was around 11:40 this morning.
Allie, the community, there's a lot of resources that are going to be pouring in for folks in that community to try to deal with this and comprehend it. The school has been canceled for the rest of the year. What is the latest and the status of the Family Reunification Center and how information is being fed to families right now?
You know, right now, I know there are still some families looking to find their children. I mean, I was just down the street at the scene where, I mean, even closer than this, and there was a woman there looking for her niece and nephew. She had called San Antonio to see if they were airlifted there. She had called to find out if they were at the hospital here, and they still didn't know where they were less than an hour ago. And that is the latest update on that, what I have on family reunification there.
Talking to investigators, it sounds like it will take quite some time to process this scene. What are you hearing from authorities who are at the school tonight on the delicate and meticulous process of trying to pull together all of the pieces of what has happened?
I mean, you just heard the former chief there talk about their children involved here, right? So this is extremely sensitive. And you've got third graders saying that they didn't know if they were going to survive this. So it is going to be a long process, and there are a lot of agencies involved. And so, you know, I don't believe we'll hear a lot of details anytime soon. But, you know, I can tell you, and I don't know if this has been widely reported with you or not, but I have, of course, several very credible sources here, again, who have children in these schools. And they're telling me that when they came here to search the perimeter, they actually found loaded magazines for AR-style rifles out there near the school. And so they're going to be piecing a lot of these things together that, yeah, haven't really been released yet, Marnie.
Allie, tell us more about Uvalde, the community. It's a small, close-knit town. It's seemingly small enough that everybody sort of knows everybody else. You've been there a while. You've been in these communities. Tell us more about the people there.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time in this community and not ever for something like this. And this is a small community, and they do rally together, and they are all extremely concerned. And I went out to talk to the mom of that child I spoke with, not to hear her child's story. He wanted to tell me. I just went there to hug her because I just can't imagine what a small community like this is dealing with right now and reeling with at this moment. But all of these families that have been near the scene that I was speaking with, they were like, no way would this ever happen here. You know, we never would expect that. And you hear that often in these really small, tight-knit communities. But it's a border community where they've always rallied together and they've always supported each other and supported law enforcement. And you see this show of force with law enforcement supporting them as well.
Yep, a lot of people looking for that hug tonight. Allie Bradley on the scene in Uvalde, Texas for us. Allie, we appreciate that report. And just a reminder for all of you at home, we continue to follow this breaking news out of Texas. We will get bits and pieces of new information as the hours and days go on. We do know that many of the injured in today's school shooting were taken to Uvalde Memorial Hospital, that is local, and also University Hospital, which is in San Antonio, was also treating some of the injured tonight. But at last check from authorities, 18 children had been killed in today's tragedy, one adult. I spoke with a man earlier today whose cousin was shot in the abdomen. She's a teacher at that school. She survived. There are survivors. They will have stories to tell and a memory they will never be able to forget. Continuing coverage here on News Nation Prime. In the moments ahead. Also, we have more election results coming in from the primaries across the country, and that includes in the state of Texas. Decision Desk HQ projecting Ken Paxton as the winner of the Republican nomination for Attorney General in Texas. He defeated George P. Bush, who is the former president's nephew, in that race. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who used to work in the White House under the Trump administration, has been declared the winner of the Republican nomination for governor in the state of Arkansas. That also according to Decision Desk HQ. And again, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, you can see him right there. This is a live picture celebrating after defeating former Senator David Perdue for the Republican nomination for governor in Georgia, addressing his supporters tonight. This, of course, was a race that was being closely watched, not because of who they are, but who was supporting them. Of course, Brian Kemp was supported by former Vice President Mike Pence, and his opponent, former Senator David Perdue, was being supported by Donald Trump. The question tonight is, how far do those endorsements go? More primary results and coverage of the tragedy in Texas still ahead. Flags at the White House at half-staff tonight. President Biden addressing the nation within the past hour in the wake of the deadliest shooting at an American elementary school since the attack at Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut, more than a decade ago in 2012. We want to bring in Tom Dempsey, our correspondent in the nation's capital tonight, with the very latest and more on the president's address to the nation and his heartfelt speech, but also his call for change. Tom.
Yeah, that's right, Marty. The message to the country tonight kind of had an emotional side to it and a legislative one. On the emotional side to it all, of course, the president, one thing I thought was really notable about the speech tonight was his message, talking about the impact of this awful, awful tragedy, noting the amount of children who died, but also the children who survived this and the children who are going to have to live with this sort of scar, if that's what you want to call it, of surviving a mass shooting and having to live through such a traumatizing experience, and how they're going to have to live with that for the rest of their life. But again, during this speech tonight, the president also spoke to the victims, the parents who have had to experience this absolute heartbreak today, Marty. And the president kind of knows what that's like after losing his son years ago. And he spoke about, again, some of the quotes from this speech about how it feels like your soul, knowing what it's like to feel like your soul has been ripped away when you lose a child so close to your heart, and how life is never quite the same when you lose a child. Again, that was his message to sort of the victims and the families impacted by today's tragedy. But again, as far as our viewers watching right now, they may very well know the outrage. When they log on to Facebook tonight and Twitter tonight, the outrage that some people are feeling tonight, maybe even some of the conversations they had around the dinner table, the outrage that's being felt tonight, people asking what could happen as a result of today's shooting? What sort of change might we see following all this? The president, telling people, the quote that stood out to me probably most of all during this speech tonight, Marty, was, when in God's name do we stand up to the gun lobby? He didn't mention Republicans. He didn't mention the GOP during the speech, calling them out for changes, or even Democrats, rather, for that. He said, when are we going to stand up to the gun lobby as when it comes to changes and, trying to prevent mass shootings? Take a listen to this speech earlier tonight when he said the time to act is now. Take a listen.
When it includes mass shootings at places like movie theaters, houses of worship, as we saw just 10 days ago, the grocery store in Buffalo, New York. I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage.
And again, the big question, what could happen after today? The building you see behind me right now and inside the Capitol, what could Congress do as a result of this? I think it's important to note, Marty, again, the president just mentioning just days ago, he was in Buffalo talking to victims, victims who died at the hands of a white supremacist inside a grocery store as they were doing, their weekly shopping inside of there. Months ago, he was in Atlanta talking to victims of a mass shooting, Asian Americans who were targeted. And then, about a decade ago, 2012, he was the vice president when the Sandy Hook shooting happened so tragically in this country. And again, back in Buffalo just last week, he was talking about a potential ban on assault weapons. So again, the president's message tonight, when are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? Didn't mention Republicans, didn't mention the GOP. The president hoping some sort of united front can happen as a result of this tragedy, Marty.
Yeah, 10 people killed in the hate crime in Buffalo. 18 children killed today. The president visited Buffalo. I would imagine that there's a lot of chatter about his trip that we anticipate will happen to Uvalde, Texas. Tom Dempsey in the nation's capital. Tom, thank you. We'll be right back.
There are families who are in mourning right now, and the state of Texas is in mourning with them for the reality that these parents are not going to be able to pick up their children.
Governor Greg Abbott reacting to today's massacre in Uvalde, Texas. Robert Sherman joining us now with the very latest from the scene there and the delicate and emotional process for investigators. Robert.
And Ashley, we actually have breaking news to share with you now. We just spoke with Texas DPS a few moments ago. They are now confirming to us that it is now 19 children that have been killed at this elementary school behind us. 2 separate teachers killed as well. Adding to that, the gunman as well. And the numbers are, of course, as we always mention, this is a fluid scene here and things change very rapidly. You look around this community, Ashley, it's 16,000 people who live in this town. So many of these people know at least someone or have. We now know 19 have been killed. 2 teachers have been killed as well. And that's subject to change. We're getting this information rapidly, and we're trying to get it to you as quickly as possible. Ashley?
All right, Robert, I'll take it from here. Thank you. Robert Sherman on the ground in Texas. That suspect today, 18 years old, killed by law enforcement on the scene, who returned fire, sustained injuries, but survived. 19 children and 2 teachers killed in this horrific tragedy in Texas, and so many more children and staff members at that school witnessed it happened. We have continuing coverage here on News Nation throughout the night. Ashley Banfield will be coming up next, and I'll be back with Leland Vittert in a little while. We'll be right back. Investigators on scene in Uvalde, Texas at Robb Elementary School tonight processing an emotional and delicate crime scene. We have now learned that 19 children lost their lives today, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders, along with 2 teachers. This is the deadliest shooting at a U.S. grade school since the attack at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012. 20 children were killed that day. And here again, we are dealing with the tragedy as a nation. The president addressing the country tonight saying there is a lot we don't know, but please pray for the families involved in Uvalde, Texas. That is our time for Prime. Stick around. Ashley Banfield picks it up from here.
Grandmother, and then engaging in body armor with all of those children and teachers in that school. One last very quick question. There was some discussion from a witness. It was a quick mention and nothing after that of a girlfriend of the shooter saying that she wanted to finish what he had started. Is there anything to that investigation? Because all I hear, sir, is that he acted alone. Are there any other people being investigated alongside of that lone gunman?
Well, we're not going to rule that out. We're going to, as I mentioned before, we're going to conduct a thorough investigation to make sure that there was no other individuals involved. As far as the identification or the mention of a girlfriend, that has not been confirmed. That is not accurate information, and we have not confirmed that. And I know you mentioned earlier as well as how much more can we process with this major crime scene since the suspect is deceased. But we do have to provide some type of closure to these families and try to identify what actually took place by obtaining evidence, looking at social media platforms, the history of this suspect to try to determine exactly what triggered this event.
Lieutenant Alvarez, thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and God bless you and your community. Just awful, awful news for him and for his colleagues to have to process tonight. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. Now, that's important because Sandy Hook was in Connecticut. He gave an impassioned speech on the floor of the Senate today, and if you didn't see it, you should. Take a look.
Mr. President, there are 14 kids dead in an elementary school in Texas right now. What are we doing? What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority, if your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing? What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as existential as this.
That's Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. That's my state, so I perked up, not only because he's my senator, but also because that's what happened in my state, Sandy Hook. So this playbook was familiar to me when this started today, which is why I immediately thought of Dave Cullen. Dave Cullen is the author of the book Columbine, which detailed what happened in 1999. And then he wrote the book Parkland, Birth of a Movement, which detailed what happened in 2018. And Dave, I don't know how many times you and I have met. I've honestly lost count in the last 20 some odd years, how many times we have met to discuss this very story. But I didn't think we were going to meet again with more than a dozen little children killed.
I didn't either. In fact, this afternoon, I realized something really stupid. Somewhere in my mind, I had apparently made this mental category of Sandy Hook as this one-of-a-kind thing. And thank God we only had one of those. And this afternoon, it was just like, oh, how stupid was that? What made me think there wouldn't be another one? Just because I think I couldn't bear the thought, because I couldn't bear the first one. You know, I mean, they're all terrible, but that was the one that was just I couldn't even handle it.
You know, Dave, honestly, when Columbine happened, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the video game culture that we have today. We didn't have the overstress, overwork, too many sports, too many grades, too many SAT demands, too hard to get into college, all these incredible stresses on kids today. And we didn't deprive them of as much sleep as we deprive them of. And so are you seeing any changes in the behavior, certainly in the numbers? I know we're seeing that. But are you seeing any difference in the kinds of people that young people are targeting, the decisions they're making in a premeditated way to take out the most innocent among us?
No, I haven't been studying that. And to tell you the truth, Ashley, I have actually lost interest in, why they're doing this and studying that. At this point, all I'm working on is like how we're going to get out of this. And, the FBI has studied to death now the types of people doing, and frankly, I don't know if the profile is evolving. But we cannot allow them to have the access to the guns to do this. It's, that's where my focus is now.
We're not even a couple of hours into this story, and the numbers just keep changing. So I can't even say we're moving on from this, Dave Cullen. We're still breaking. The news is still breaking, and God, I hope the number doesn't climb. But I said that last hour, and it did. And I say this every time I sign off with you. I hope I don't have a conversation with you again, unless it's something unrelated, Dave.
I do too, and I'm glad you played the Chris Murphy clip, because that's exactly how I'm feeling. An hour ago, I was still in the distraught phase. I've moved into the anger phase right now. And my anger really is so much at them. It's like, what are you doing? What will it take for you people to do something? And the main person I look to for wisdom for this these days is Gabby Giffords. She actually named her organization Giffords Courage, and that's really a dig on the politicians, because that's who's lacking the courage. That's all that's like, when 80–90% of the public is for sensible gun legislation, and these jokers are still doing nothing. That's the
It
problem.
is hard. It is hard. Dave Cullen is the author of Columbine. He's the author of Parkland. And I don't know, maybe the author of Uvalde at this point, Robb Elementary. Dave, thank you. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Ashley. Good night.
Good night. And today, if you were watching News Nation, there was a young reporter named Allie Bradley who was on the scene and had some of the very first details firsthand, spoke with witnesses who actually saw the killer actually smashing into the school. Allie Bradley is going to join me next. Allie joins me live now. Allie, I watched earlier as you did coverage and included firsthand accounts from witnesses that you spoke with on the scene just moments after this attack. Walk me through the things that you learned firsthand from these witnesses today.
Well, actually, Ashley, I've been covering this national crisis down here as an immigration reporter really since August. So this has been kind of my stomping grounds for almost a year now. And so this community and these people that live in this community, I know a lot of people that are out here. And one of my sources actually has a student at this school, which is how I learned about this incident in the first place. And luckily that student is home safe. I was able to go and meet with the mother just to hug her. I just sat down and hugged her. But the son did want to tell me his story. So he told me a little bit about what he experienced. A third-grade boy telling me that they were at recess, that he saw the gunman fire shots, and he said, this man is serious about hurting somebody. And I asked him how he felt about going back to school at some point. He said he did not want to go back to school. He said that he didn't know if he was going to survive this. Now, it comes to the eyewitnesses. I talked to two separate people that live right next to the school here, and they, within an hour of each other, not related, did not know each other, and have the exact same story, where this black, dark gray pickup truck sped through the neighborhood, and neither of them thought anything of it, because this area has seen an uptick of human and drug smuggling pursuits out here. So they thought it was just another pursuit. Well, it was a pursuit, because they were following him after he was at his grandmother's house, who we now know who he shot. And that was just about a mile away from where this crash ended. Both of these eyewitnesses tell me that it did not appear that this suspect was targeting the school, more that he was speeding past. The car crash, the truck crashed right next to the school. They had funeral people and the funeral home right next door. They ran out to see if the man was okay, and that's when shots were firing right then. Then they watched him run across the field, get access into that school, and that, again, is when the shots were fired there. That third-grade boy telling me he saw the gunman weaving between the cars, shooting outside as well. And that, again, was when they were at recess. Now, one of the gentlemen that I talked to was actually a classmate of this shooter. He actually went to school with him. He was in class with him 2 years ago. I asked him if there was any indication that this is something that they would have thought that this shooter was capable of, and he said no. He said he didn't identify anything that was sketchy. Nothing would have shown them that this was something that this man was capable of. Now, he said that he has not seen him at the school for 2 years. He believes he dropped out of school because, again, this is a small school. These are small communities. And he had not seen this man since then. He said he was wildly different in looks. He looked completely different than when he saw him 2 years ago in school. But again, this is not something that they ever thought they would see in this community. It's something you hear in these small towns. And he said it's hard because he went to that elementary school. He knows the teachers there. This young 18-year-old man who's a senior right now, he knows these people that go to this school. Now, again, I first was really tipped off about this, if you will, because one of my sources had a student there. And it's by the grace of God that he's safe. And really, all of this response was in part so quick because they were all down here, because this has been an ongoing crisis for illegal immigration across the Del Rio sector, which Uvalde County is part of that, or in Uvalde is part of that.
Incredible details, just incredible details that you were able to get, Allie, especially with that third grader, because they are the other victims in all of this, the ones who survived, who will never be the same because of what they have lived through, a war zone at the ripe young age of about 9, 10, or 11 years old, not even. Allie Bradley, excellent work today, and thank you for relaying those details to us. Appreciate it. I'm going to take a quick break, but when we come back, you have got to wait for this. The governor of Connecticut, back during Sandy Hook, made a decision, and it was an enormous decision. He chose to be the person who notified the families of the Sandy Hook killer that they were not going to see their kids again. He himself did it. And he is joining me next. We're just getting some video into News Nation that I want to share with you, and this is extraordinarily difficult. It is the Sergeant Willie DeLeon Civic Center, which, if you've been watching the story, you might know is the headquarters now for this tragedy, where families have gathered waiting for word, waiting to find out if they will be reunited with their children. All of these families waiting and hoping to hell it's not going to be the word that some families are certain to receive in the next hours. Again, that's the Sergeant Willie DeLeon Civic Center in Uvalde, Texas. It is frightfully reminiscent of the Sandy Hook Elementary process that the parents went through. They too gathered at a central location away from Sandy Hook Elementary School, and for hours and hours, they too were wondering if they would have the horrible news that they'd lost their children. The governor of Connecticut at the time was Dan Malloy, and he decided that it should be his job to make those notifications known, to face those families and let them know that indeed they had lost their kids, and he is live with me now. Governor, thank you so much for being here tonight, and I am so sorry that we are meeting on this occasion, but I can only assume that you heard this news, and it was a terrible flashback for you because you know full well what those families are going through and those politicians in Texas.
Yeah, it very reminiscent of what happened at Sandy Hook. The initial message was, you know, 1 or 2 people killed, which generally, and I was used to be a prosecutor in New York City, and what that normally meant was that it was a domestic. And then, of course, within a very short period of time, we came to understand that there was a much larger shooting at the school, and got in a car and drove down to that beautiful bucolic community and got to the firehouse, which is where all of the folks who hadn't been reunited were, and lots of other people around. And then the wait began. And as you've mentioned, police protocols, you know, are such that you don't confirm a death until you have an identification made. And we didn't have identifications made because we didn't have someone to do it, and we tried to think about how to do it, and then ultimately it just dragged on too long, and made the decision that it was unfair to these families to be waiting for a confirmation that might not come for another 10 or 11 hours, and ultimately the troopers and the police didn't want to do that because that broke their protocols. And so, as you mentioned, I made the decision to do it.
Governor Malloy, after Sandy Hook, we all said the same thing: never again. It will never, ever happen again. This can't happen again. There has to be some kind of change in this country. Regardless of how anyone watching feels about gun control, there had to be something to prevent this from ever happening again. And this is year 10 since Sandy Hook. It is a decade since Sandy Hook, and still nothing. December. Is President Biden up for this? Is the president going to be able to do anything about it? Is anyone going to be able to do anything about this?
You know, a couple of quick things. 2 days after the shooting on Sunday show, somebody interviewed me, and I just warned everyone that this was going to come to your community. This was going to happen in your movie theater or your play theater or your school or your mall. I'm not prophetic, except when it comes to predicting doom. And of course, in the 10 years that you're talking about since that December shooting, almost 10 years ago, we've seen this play out time and time and time again, despite the efforts of individuals to try to make us safer. I mean, one of the questions I had, did he shoot glass doors in? You know, one of the things that we did in the wake of the shooting at Sandy Hook was to say that all glass had to be reinforced, had to have a metal reinforcement if it was an entrance. You know, I don't know whether anyone read that report, but in Connecticut we did, and we required reinforced glass at all entrances. there are simple things we can do to make ourselves safer, and then there's very complicated issues that people get all worked up about. But there are ways to make ourselves safer. One of those, by the way, is to get people with mental health challenges the treatment that they need and deserve. And there are lots of states who are denying that needlessly. And I don't know what the laws are in Texas, but there are a number of states who just have not expanded Medicare to allow for that treatment to happen. I mean, let's treat sick people. How about that?
And this man was entirely sick at 18 years old, beyond sick. Former Governor of Connecticut, Dan Malloy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to do this for us tonight. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances.
Keep up your good work.
Thank you. I want to bring in now Scarlett Lewis. Scarlett lost her son, Jesse, in the Sandy Hook massacre. Jesse was only 6 years old, but somehow had the wherewithal to scream and yell that the children should run for cover while the shooter was reloading, and those kids survived. 9 of them survived because of Jesse's heroics at age 6. Scarlett Lewis is his mom, and Dr. Steven Seeger is a psychiatrist who joins me as well. Scarlett, thank you for summoning the courage to talk to me tonight, because on a day like this, I just can't imagine what you are going through, feeling like, here we go again.
I've been exactly where those parents are, and it's devastating. You don't know if you're going to survive.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts or advice? Not that they're going to hear it now, but at some point they're going to need it, on how to navigate not just the next hours and days, but the next decade, because that's where you are.
I am. I'm 10 years down the road, and my advice to them is to know that you're not alone. The country grieves for you, and there will be meaning found in their loss, because we are going to be keeping our kids safe. We're going to be safeguarding their mental health and well-being. And I have hope. Believe it or not, there are things that we can do, and we will be honoring those lives collectively.
Well, and I want to reiterate that your son Jesse, at the young age of 6, somehow was able to have the knowledge and the ability to become a hero in such a calamity and save the lives of other children. Dr. Seeger, those other children, we heard from Allie Bradley earlier that there were all these children out at recess who saw this. There were children in the classrooms who saw this. These are children who are going to be survivors. What are they going to have to cope with? What are their lives going to be like?
Well, it's PTSD. And it happens to kids. It can happen to anybody. Anyone who witnesses this horror is going to have to relive it. They're going to have help. They're going to have nurturing. And you can imagine, put yourself in that seat, in that school, and you're 6 or you're 7. I have kids that age. Can you imagine? And so they're going to need tons of intervention, therapy, support groups, that kind of thing for these kids. They'll have it all their lives. I'm sure if you ask all the kids who are at Sandy Hook who survived, you'll never forget it. But they can get through it. But it's going to require a concerted effort on the part of the whole community to support these kids who were actually there and saw this.
And like, Sandy Hook, Uvalde is a small community, and they will have to come together as well. Scarlett Lewis and Dr. Steven Seeger, thank you both. And again, I keep repeating this. I say it all the time. I'm so sad that I say it all the time, but I'm sad we've met under these circumstances, and I appreciate your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming up after the break, there is a big question looming over all of this. Even as the numbers keep changing, even as the banner on your screen right now may not be final. We may not be at 19 children. We may be at 20. We may be at more adults killed. There are still people injured. And the big looming question is, how will this affect us? Will this affect anything? Politics matter. And this is a political year. Believe it or not, it's a political night. So will this have any effect? That's next. I mentioned, just going to break, that this, in fact, is primary election night, the 6th primary election night so far this season. And while we would normally be knee-deep in vote counts and graphics and pundits, this is, not the time. But I do want you to go to bed informed on the biggest contests, because they do matter, especially with issues like you're seeing tonight on the news. In Georgia, incumbent GOP Governor Brian Kemp has easily defeated his primary challenger, who was backed by Donald Trump. With the votes still being tallied, Kemp is running 3-1 ahead of former Georgia Senator David Perdue. Trump's picking Georgia for the GOP Senate primary. Former NFL star Herschel Walker, he simply trounced his opposition for the right to face off against the Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock in November. In Alabama, Republican Katie Britt is running well ahead of Congressman Mo Brooks in that state's GOP primary for Senate. Brooks was endorsed by Donald Trump and then was unendorsed by Donald Trump because he said we needed to move on from the election fraud issue. In Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders easily won the Republican nomination for governor. That is an office, yes, that her father once held. And in Texas, the sitting attorney general, Republican Ken Paxton, dominated a runoff election against George P. Bush, the grandson of President Bush 41. The voters do not seem the least bit bothered by the fact that the Texas' highest-ranking law enforcement official has been under indictment for securities fraud for 7 years. Mark McKinnon is a former advisor to George W. Bush and also John McCain. He's also host of The Circus on Showtime. He joins me now live. I thought we'd spend the whole night talking about these results, and we're not. We're talking about something entirely different. But I will ask you this, Mark. I thought we were going to go into this election and we would never hear the words abortion or gun control. And now I wonder if all we're going to hear going into this election is abortion and gun control.
Absolutely right. This is why politics matters. And as you said, this is both of these issues have intruded in a way that are dominating your news coverage tonight and will for the foreseeable future. This is just a sad fact that we have to repeatedly deal with these crises that are so avoidable. I mean, if you want to see, we have parallels around the world, actually. We saw in Scotland in 1996 a mass shooting where 18 school children were killed. They changed their gun laws, and since then they have had 0 mass school shootings. And in this year, we've had more mass shootings and school shootings than there are numbers of days in the year. So this is not complicated in terms of things that we can do. We know, for example, there are simple things that we can do like universal background checks. And that's something, by the way, that Donald Trump was inclined to do until the NRA lobby weighed in on him, as you recall, after the Florida shootings. And so that I've never seen a public policy issue, actually, in my entire career of politics, in which public opinion is so divorced from the reality of what's going on in public policy. Because I'm with an organization called on the board of an organization called 97%, which represents gun owners and gun owners who are looking toward making gun safety measures more available around the United States. And among gun owners, 86% support background checks. That's not everybody. That's gun owners. And by the way, that number is more than 80% among Republicans. So the fact that we have more than 80% of Republicans who support background checks and can't pass legislation that supports that mandate is shocking, and it's indefensible.
Mark McKinnon is the host of Showtime's The Circus, and you're right. There are plenty of Republicans who are for common sense reform when it comes to gun legislation. It is just mystifying how we just can't get there as a country. Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much for doing this for us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being there, Ashley.
I told you before, I'm going to tell you again. The count on the bottom of your screen is 19 children dead, 2 teachers dead, and I don't know if that count is going to change, but we are live in Texas.